This is going to be an introduction to the CodeHS IDE. We're going to talk at a kind of high level, general things about the IDE. Some of those might be familiar to you. Some of them might be new to you, but we are always adding new things and improving the IDE. So there might be a couple of things here that you haven't seen since last school year that you're going to be excited about. That's really the point of this today, is to make sure that you know everything that you and your students can do with the IDE. So if you need an account, it looks like most people here are already teaching with CodeHS. That's great. If you're watching this later and you want to play along, feel free to sign up for a teacher account at codehs.com/signup. So to get started, first and really good question is, what is an IDE? IDE is short for Integrated Development Environment. That's more than just a text editor. It's more than just where you type. It's additionally the place where you run code, the place where you debug code, and can have features like sharing and collaborating, can have features like documentation, and a lot of extra stuff that we'll see today. The idea is that it's the one place you need to go for when you're writing code on CodeHS. So to access the CodeHS IDE, it's available in a lot of different places. It's what students use in coding exercises. It's what you might have used in CodeHS Create, where you are creating new content. But what I love the most, and where I love to use the IDE, is the CodeHS sandbox. Some of you might not be super familiar with the sandbox. That's where I'm going to be doing most of the webinar, because it's the really easy way to get into the IDE, start playing with some code. The sandbox is where you and your students can do open-ended coding. You can give your students kind of an open-ended assignment, and they can just go to the sandbox, mess around, have some fun, explore programming languages. That's where I'm going to be going today. So I'm going to go ahead and actually jump in a second. But first, the agenda of what we're going to be talking about. We're kind of split into 4 pieces here. First, we're just going to be talking about generally navigating the IDE, building up a terminology for what the different parts of it are, how we can use them, how they interact with each other. So that's going to be the file list, the settings, the editor, where you actually type the code, and then the output tabs. Then we're going to talk about managing files. We're going to talk about how you can create and use folders, how you can upload to CodeHS to use your existing content on CodeHS, and some about renaming folders and files. We're then going to talk about some of the sharing you can do in the CodeHS IDE. That includes collaboration and embedding. And then finally, we'll talk about some of the additional tools that are in the IDE, but more importantly, show you how to find those tools for yourself so you can explore. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to jump right into the sandbox, and we'll take it from there. So I have an account put up here where I've created some programs. I'll go ahead and navigate to it again. So if you're on your CodeHS homepage, right, this is what you see when you log into the site. Let me just turn notifications off. You can access the sandbox in a couple of ways. The easiest way is going to be up in the top bar, just clicking sandbox right here. So when you get to your sandbox, I've created a couple of programs, so you can see that those are displayed at the bottom. If you haven't, you'll probably just have the one default Carol program that shows up when you start. But what we're going to do is create a new program. What you do is just type in the top bar here. You give the name of your program. So let's just go ahead and make a basic Python program. I saw we had a person teaching APCSP with Python. So let's say basic Python 3. When I click create program, I'm given the option to choose between any of our different program types. And we have a lot. So these are organized by language, and then within language, the specific flavor. So you can see in Python.
Andy, 1 second. Are you intending to show the CodeHS sandbox right now?
Oh yeah, what am I sharing?
Right now, we're just seeing the slides still.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
That's all right.
Thank you for stopping me, Emma.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so I believe I am here.
Yep,
Okay.
Now we can see the sandbox.
Good. All right, so I'll go through what I just did, but a little bit faster so we don't run out of time. So what I was trying to say was you can just be on the page you are when you log into CodeHS, your teacher page or your student page. To get to the sandbox, you want to click sandbox in the top nav bar here. That'll take you to the sandbox. So I have a lot of programs here at the bottom. You can see they're all listed. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one, and we can start from scratch. So to create a new program, just at the top here, very first thing, create new program. I'll create a program called basic Python 3. Click create. And then, like I said, we have each programming language listed. And then within that, we have this more specific flavors of that language. So that can be a version, Python 2 or Python 3, but it can also be something like Python with graphics, Python with Pygame. I'm going to leave it up to you to explore these and find what the differences are and the cool things you can do in each, but we're going to go ahead and get started with a Python 3 program. So I check the box for Python 3 and click Create Program, and I arrive in the CodeHS IDE. So we're going to talk about the overall navigation of the IDE, the different pieces of it, and kind of understand how they interact, what we can do here. So we split it into 3 different panels. We have the left panel, which is right now showing the files. We have the center, which is where we're going to type code. And then on the right, we have the output, and additionally, a couple other tabs that we'll talk about later. With all of these panels, they can be resized, which is useful if you're maybe on a smaller screen and need a little bit more real estate for coding. You can click and drag these bars to give yourself some more room. So I can focus entirely on coding. I'm looking just at this. If you wanted to focus just on the output, right, you just wanted to show what your program's doing, you can make the output bigger. So all of these can be resized to kind of make it work for you on your screen. The next thing that we can look at is the way that you can use settings to configure that. So on the left side, because I've collapsed it, you can see we have these 2 tabs. If you hover, it'll explain what the tab is. And by clicking on one of these, you'll open up that tab in the left panel. So I'll open the Files tab. We can see the files in our program, but then I can open the Settings tab. There's a lot of settings in here. We have some videos about what each of these specific settings does and how you can work with them. But again, I just encourage you to play around with these, see how you can use them to help teach. The first thing I'm going to do, and what you might want to do when you're presenting to your students, is I'm just going to make my font size a bit bigger, so it's easier to see on the webinar. So I'm going to increase the font size in the editor, and I'm also going to increase the font size in the console. Okay, great. So that's kind of an overview of the basic organization of the IDE, the different pieces of it, how you can jump around between the different tabs, and how you can resize things. The next thing that I want to talk about is going to be using the file list. So that's the first tab here on the left, the File tab. And what you can do here is you can manage the files in your program. In some program types, you kind of only have one file. In JavaScript programs or like a Carol program, you only have one file. But when you get more complicated in a Python program or even a Java program, you're going to have a lot of different classes and they can all interact with each other. The file list is where you're going to go to create new files, to create new folders, and kind of define the architecture of your program. So what I'm going to do is create a new file. I'm going to do this in Python. I'll also do it in Java a little bit later on, but we'll just start with Python for right now. So to create a new file or folder, you'll click this New button at the top of the file list. If this has somehow disappeared for you, right, it's collapsed, you can always just click this little file icon. It'll pop open. So I'll click New, and then I'm given the option to choose between creating a new folder, a new file, or uploading something. We're going to start simple with just creating a new file. So I click New, then click File. I'm going to come up with some kind of file that I'm going to create here. So let's say, for example, I'm doing a program that's built around using math, and I want to define my own math functions. I'll create a file called math.py. And then here I can kind of define the parts of my application that just have to do with math. So for example, I'll have a function that adds. So I have def add, I'll make it take x and y and return x plus y. So this isn't an entirely separate file. I can switch back and forth between them by clicking on them, just like you could in Eclipse or IntelliJ or BlueJ or any other IDE you might use. But it's going to be really easy to switch between them. Sorry about the dog. We're in a new house. He's a little bit freaked by being in new digs, so he'll probably quiet down soon. So we can switch between the 2 different files, and we can then use that math.py in our main.py. If we just say import add from math, I believe that's how you do it. And then I can call add with the numbers 1 and 2, and I'll go ahead and print that out. I believe it's actually from math import add. I have to write a lot of programming languages, and so I get confused about how to do the different ones of these. So I think it's I think you can't actually call it math, which brings up an interesting point. Python has a built-in math, so I'm going to define my own math helpers. So I'm going to rename this to mathhelpers.py. I'll explain renaming again. I just did it because it was a little bit useful. I'll say from math helpers import add. And there we go. So we have an entirely separate file where we can kind of keep our project clean by having a separate file where we define all our math stuff, right? Here's where we define adding. We can then define subtracting, which, all of these are pretty straightforward. So you shouldn't need to write adding and subtracting yourself. But this just shows how you can use a separate file to split out parts of your project and make it a lot easier to maintain your code. I'll go ahead and even create a third file just to show the whole thing again. I'll make another file and I'll call it utils.py. This is a common practice where you just define some utility functions. Let's just say that we have a utility that, I don't know, that gives us a string with title case letters or uppercase letters. So we can define a function and we'll call it toUpperCase, and it takes a string and we'll just return string.toUpper, is I believe how you do it. You can just keep defining new files. You can keep importing them, right? All these files are going to be available when you run your code. All you have to do is click new and then choose to make a file. Say that we realize that our project's getting a little bit complex, right? We have a bunch of these files and they're all at the top level. It's getting complicated where they're kind of all, in the same place. You can use folders to organize those, just like you would on your computer desktop. To create a new folder, just the same way, you'll click new and then folder. You give a name to your folder, and then, I don't know, let's come up with a good name. Let's call it images, actually. So what we have now is a folder here called images. If you want to add files to this folder, you'll click this drop down on the right side. That gives you the option to add a file, a folder, upload something, or rename it. Again, just to make that clear, you click new, folder, give the name of your folder. I'll make another one called text files or something like that. And then in order to add files to it, you'll just click this little drop down on the right side. Great. So we just created a new folder called images. What are we going to do with that? The way that we're going to actually populate that folder is going to be uploading files from our own computer. This is something that's really cool and powerful in CodeHS because I know that a lot of you have worked with curriculum outside of CodeHS. Maybe you have worked with the APCSA labs. Maybe you have a lot of your own curriculum you've created. Maybe you've gotten some curriculum from another teacher and you want to get it to work in CodeHS. So you could copy and paste all your code back and forth, but when it comes to something like images, how do you actually get those into CodeHS? So you can upload images, text files, kind of anything into the CodeHS IDE. If you want to upload to the top level, right outside of any folder, click new, upload. But I actually want to upload into the images folder. I'm going to click this drop-down arrow, and I'm going to choose upload file. When I click that, I'll be prompted to upload a file. You can do this in two ways. You can click browse to browse your computer, or you can just drag and drop a file here. I have a bunch of Zoom things covering my window, so I'm just going to click browse. And then I'm going to choose this picture of Carol the dog. So I'm going to go ahead and click open and then upload it. And it looks like we have an interesting bug. I'm going to work on this in a second. I think that we can actually fix this just by uploading to the top level. I'll take a look at that. Great. So I uploaded Carol. So Carol the dog is now a file in the IDE. Just like we can have text files, we have an image file. So this is an image file that you can actually just use in your program. You can, in your Python program, import the image. You can do image analysis. If you're working in the APCSA Picture Lab, for example, you can upload your own pictures to use in Picture Lab. This is a really powerful way to use your own content in the CodeHS IDE. So let's say that we made some files we actually don't want anymore. What we can do is delete any file or folder. You'll go ahead and click the drop down and then click delete. It'll confirm you know what you're doing. We know what we're doing. We're going to delete it. We'll clean up all these. Okay, so this was the basics of how you can create and delete files and folders and how you can use files and folders to help organize your project. I want to show something a little bit more advanced, which is specifically uploading jar files. In the Java programming language, there's a thing called a jar, which is precompiled Java code. It's a way that you can use somebody else's code that they've already created in your own project. In the APCSA labs, there's jars for Picture Lab, there's jars for Grid World, right? There's jars for all of these existing applications that you might want to use in your own project. Just like we uploaded images and text files, we can actually upload a jar file to use in the program. I'm going to go ahead and show this in Grid World. Grid World is an APCSA lab where you kind of create a graphical program and you have these little bugs that move around. And you can find jars for this online where they've pre-compiled the code. I'm going to upload the jar file for Grid World, and I can use it directly in the CodeHS IDE. I'm going to click New, and then click Upload. And just like before, I'll browse my computer. Before I grab this image, this time I'm going to grab a jar file, which shows up nicely as a cup of coffee on my computer. So I'll click Open and then add that file. You can see that the jar file has been added. If you try to open it, it'll let you know, don't open a jar file in the text editor. It's going to be really hard to read. So we show you this picture of a cup of coffee instead. So now when I run this program, I'm actually going to be able to use that jar file in order to do the output of the program, the graphical output. So you can see that all the code that I wrote was these, 40 lines, most of which are comments. And then I just uploaded the jar file for Grid World. And just like that, I have Grid World running. I can interact with this. I can, do the cool Grid World things, which is you put rocks and you can, I can put some bugs on the screen and stuff like that. If any of you have worked with APCSA, you're maybe familiar with this lab. It's a really fun time and kind of shows the cooler things you can do in Java at the end of the school year. But what this is showing is that you can use existing curriculum that other people have made, just upload those files into the CodeHS IDE, and you can hit the ground running. You can immediately start using something as complicated as Grid World. So again, just to confirm that we all saw what just happened, what I did was I clicked New, clicked Upload, and then browse my computer for a jar file. If you need help finding jars, you can feel free to let us know. You can contact us on support. We sometimes have to do some custom things to make the jar files work with CodeHS, but that's something we're happy to do until we get this working a little bit more robustly. Okay, so that was a more advanced kind of uploading, which was uploading jar files. We're going to go back to something maybe a little bit simpler and show how you can upload a text file. So I'm going to switch to an HTML program. So let's do HTML. I'm back in the sandbox. I'll create a new HTML program by clicking Create Program and then choosing HTML. Once I create this, I'm greeted with just, a basic HTML program. But say I want to use some maybe HTML I've already created, or maybe I want to use HTML from somewhere else on the internet, right? I want to start working from an example somewhere. What I did just before this webinar was I actually just copy and pasted the HTML for google.com, right? If you just go to google.com, this page that you see, I saved this HTML to my computer. And what I'm going to show is you can actually just upload any HTML into the CodeHS IDE as a text file and use it in your program. So I'll click New, Upload. And before, right, I showed uploading an image and uploading a jar. I'm going to upload a HTML file, which is just, I copy and pasted the HTML for Google. I'll click Open and Add File. And just like that, it's now in the CodeHS IDE. I didn't have to copy and paste anything. I didn't have to type anything. It's just in there. So what I'm going to do is add an anchor tag. If you don't know HTML, I'm just going to make it so I can link to that Google page. Go to Google. And when I run this, I'm not actually going to be going to google.com. I'm going to this HTML file that I created. So I made my own little Google by copying their HTML, putting it in the CodeHS IDE. Of course, this is something to I'm not going to use this to try to fish people or to try to get around copyrights or something. This is really useful if you have your own personal website and you want to move it into CodeHS, or if you find really valuable HTML tutorials online that have example code and you want to put them into the CodeHS IDE, you can just upload them as text files and use them directly. Okay, so we just talked about navigating the IDE and managing files. I'm going to show a little bit more about how you can actually use the IDE to share. If you have any questions about what I just talked about with uploading, renaming folders and files, please ask those, and we can take a second to answer them, because otherwise I'm going to move forward to sharing how you can actually use the CodeHS IDE to show off your program, to get other people involved with your code, and to kind of build up a portfolio of the cool things you made on CodeHS. All right, so we're going to talk about sharing. The sandbox is separate from CodeHS curriculum, right? So it's kind of a place where your students can make cool programs. They can kind of do their own thing. They can explore some creative options. But that means that they can also share those programs and they can also collaborate on those programs, right? It's meant to be a place where students can kind of explore coding and discover things. So any sandbox program can be made publicly available that your students could share it out if they wanted to. And so I'm going to show how you or your students can share an HTML or any program in the sandbox and kind of the cool things you can do with that. So say, for example, I wanted to work with my students in a live classroom, right? Even though I'm remote, I wanted to work with my students, some of which are in the classroom, some of which are at home. And I wanted to help give them examples of how you can create an HTML program. I wanted to work with them just like I would if we were all in the same classroom together. You can just create a new program. I'm going to call it collaborative HTML. And just like before, you just create the program. Nothing about this is new. But if I wanted to get my students to work with me on this, if I wanted them to be able to actually see what I'm typing as I'm typing it, and maybe get them to type with me, what you can do is you can share this program and create a collaborative real-time environment. To get to this, you're going to click the share button in the run bar, right next to the name of the program. You'll click share. And then there's a couple options here. We'll talk through those later. I'm going to jump right to collaborate. As soon as you click that, you're given a URL that you can share out to people. So I'm actually going to enlist MR or anybody else who wants to join this. I'm going to go ahead and send out a URL in the Zoom chat. Any of you can join this program. And as long as you are logged into your CodeHS account, you'll be able to join this and start collaborating with me. So see that MR just joined. And MR can now type along with me in this program. So you can imagine that if you were doing a live class and you wanted your students to kind of one by one, maybe give examples, see if they understand a concept, you can have the students come into your program, type along with you. And then also, as I'm typing, MR can see what I'm writing. So for example, MR just created this anchor tag. I'll rerun the program and you can see that we have this, this link showing up. Okay, so it is private right now. It looks like I just need to check this public box. Okay, so I'll explain the public box later. You can all try refreshing that URL and it should let you in now. I had my program set to private before the webinar so that people couldn't jump in. Okay, so you can give it another try. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, so it looks like everyone's in here now. We have Nancy, Rasha, Julie, and then a couple other people have joined as well. Okay, so all of you can type along in this program, and you can also see what I'm typing. Rasha asked a question, can we have different file types in the same project, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript? That's a great question, and I can just show you how to do that right now. I'll click New, I'll create new file, and I'm gonna just go ahead and make a CSS file. I'll call it style.css. And then in here, I can just define some styles. So I'm going to say H1 tags should be colored red. Whenever I'm testing CSS, I always write the ugliest styles that don't actually look that good. So we're going to see that we have a pretty hideous website. But I'm going to go ahead and create link to that style sheet, which I believe you do with link ref is equal to style sheet. I don't remember how to link to style sheets. I'm going to open the docs tab, which I'll actually talk about later, but I just wanted to see how you do this. So I'm going to open a style sheet and I'm linking to it here. The href is going to be style.css. Now, when I run this, you can see our H1 tags are these bright garish red color. So great question, Racha, that you can, in fact, create any kind of file in the program and you can link to them. So I went ahead and created a style.css. I said that all all H1 tags should be red. And then here I linked to it. Okay, so I kind of skimmed over a thing that I just did, which was I, as a person who writes code all the time, forgot how to do a thing. And that's going to happen to you. It's going to happen to your students. I could have tried to search Google and find out what the way to link to a CSS sheet was, but I know that our CodeHS curriculum developers have created really good documentation that lives directly in the IDE. To access that, I just clicked the Docs tab on the right side here. Next to Output, there's Docs. I clicked that and I could navigate here. I found exactly what I was looking for, which was adding external CSS. And I found a code snippet that gave an example. I was able to put that code snippet right into my own code, make it work for me. So that kind of segues us into the next point. I realize we're running a bit out of time, so I'll try to cover that pretty quickly. And that's going to be the more powerful tools that exist kind of on the right side of the CodeHS IDE, right? We talked about the file list and the settings on the left. We typed together on the right, in the center, but I want to talk about some of the tools that exist on the right. So if you go to the right side of the IDE, you see a couple tabs. There's Output, which is what you see when your program runs, right? That's the output of your program. I just showed the Docs tab, which is a place where the CodeHS curriculum developers put documentation for how to work on a program. The next thing you can do is go to the More tab. The More tab has a bunch of different options, and I'm going to try to cover the ones of these that I can, but we are running out of time. The most important ones, I think, are going to be History, so I'm going to cover that one first. History shows a snapshot of your program from any time it's saved. So you can see that I have a number of snapshots here, and just by hovering my cursor over each one, I can see how this program developed over time. So I can see that it started with just this H1, and then MR added the anchor tag, and then we added another H1, and over time this program grew. I can additionally reset the code to a previous snapshot in time. When we're collaborating, we can't do that, but what you can do is you can go back to a previous snapshot, and an additional really powerful thing you can do here is you can see how your students were thinking. You can go through time and see how your student changed their program from one snapshot to the next. This is also really valuable. If you see your student started with no code at all, and then in the very next snapshot, they had the entire program completed, it's usually an indicator that the student might have pasted the solution in. Something to be watching out for. Okay, so a couple other things I want to share really quickly. We have the Download tab, which lets you download your code as a zip or a text file. That's a way that you can actually take all the contents of your program, put it somewhere else, share it, do whatever you want with it. You can additionally run a lot of programs on your phone. So it'll give you a QR code. I can go ahead and scan it on my phone. And I'm just going to go ahead and open it right here. And what we get is I have the beautiful program we made running on my phone. Your students can use this to, both with HTML programs, view their websites. You can also, with a couple other programming languages, actually create apps that run on phones, which is very cool. We additionally have an Upload tab here where you can upload files, webcam images, microphone, and use those in your program. So I realize I kind of rushed through those parts of the Output tab because we were running out of time a little bit, but I want to make sure that if anybody has any questions about what we just covered, or things that we didn't get to that you have questions about, something that you've seen in the IDE and you want to learn a little bit more about, we can take a couple minutes to answer any questions. So I'm actually going to jump back to the slides. Okay, adding assets like pictures, great point. Rasha, I'll go ahead and do that right now. Click New, click Upload, browse for the image. I'm gonna grab this picture of Carol. I'm gonna go ahead and add it. And then we're gonna go click into Carol. And then I can just copy this URL, put it directly into my program. Image source is going to be Carol the dog. Go ahead and run this. And we have a great big Carol the dog. So I went through that pretty quickly. You can upload anything pretty much. You can just click New and then Upload. So Nancy, I'll talk a little bit more about sharing just because I didn't get to everything you can do with sharing. I jumped right to collaborating. If you click the share modal, you're going to see a bunch of different options here. MR also shared out the knowledge base article on sharing, which will kind of explain everything I'm about to show, but in a lot more depth. So these URLs here, you can just copy this URL, share it out to anybody, as long as your program is public, which is the mistake I made earlier, right? You can make any of your programs private so people can't see them. But you could, for example, make an example that you want your students to be able to view in the sandbox, copy that link, share it out, put it up in your like when the students walk in the classroom or log in, you maybe have a program there for them to look at, an example you made in the sandbox. There's also app and embed, a bunch of different ways you can share and use your programs. The knowledge base article MR sent out is really going to be helpful for that. So I'm going to go ahead and jump back to the slides as we wrap up here. Okay. So we have a couple more resources. We'll share these slides out so you can directly access these URLs. We have a knowledge base article on using the sandbox, which is where we just were. And we have an additional article on real-time collaboration, what we did together in that HTML program. MR can also help out with any knowledge base articles specific to questions you have. But then if you want any more resources, there's a couple ways you can make sure you're in touch with what we're doing. You can become a CodeHS certified educator. You can join the CodeHS educators Facebook group where teachers are always talking about how you can use CodeHS, cool things they're doing. We have a bunch of CodeHS or teacher-led workshops. You can find those on codehs.com/info/pd/free. You can also follow us on social media. We're always sharing links to articles or helpful things or cool things that students have done. So, if there's a thing that you just didn't know was possible, you might see that on Twitter, where we just are always, sharing out, did you know you can collaborate on programs?